Wyoming Territory, 1889. Night pressed hard against the windows of the White Lantern Saloon, thick as wet wool. Mara Kincaid sat tied to a chair in the center of the floor, her breath shaking, blood dried at the corner of her mouth. The lamplight wavered across the walls, catching her trembling hands and the bruises that marked each hour she had survived. The wind hissed under the door, like it was warning her to run, but her legs were bound tight against the chair. Somewhere deep in her chest, beneath all the pain, a truth she hadn't dared to voice stirred again. The past wasn't done with her yet. Boots scraped the floorboards around her. The men circled close, their shadows swallowing her whole. Someone laughed, low and mean. Another lifted her chin with two dirty fingers, forcing her swollen eye to meet his grin. She couldn't pull away. The rope bit deep into her wrists until her skin burned. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be left out in the cold," one of them said, breath sour with whiskey. "But maybe that's where trouble like you belongs." The room smelled of spilled liquor and old smoke. Every sound, glass clinking, cards shuffling, the wheeze of the lantern, felt too sharp. Mara tried to swallow, but her throat had gone dry somewhere between fear and exhaustion. She wanted to scream again, but screaming only made them laugh. Her mind flickered to her mother's sewing shop, the small window where she used to sit and stitch under the morning sun. That world felt impossible now, like it belonged to another woman entirely. She blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. Crying wouldn't save her. It never had. One of the men stepped forward with a pair of dice glinting in his palm. He rolled them across his knuckles with a showman's ease, like this wasn't hell, but some carnival game. "No sense dragging this out," he said. "Night's short, and we've got our fun to settle." Her breath shuddered. She shook her head weakly. "Please, don't make me a bet." Her words barely carried, but the men heard. Their grins widened. Another grabbed the back of her chair, yanking it upright when she flinched away. Her ribs screamed from the sudden jolt. "Begging already?" the tallest one sneered. "We ain't even rolled yet." The dice clattered to the table behind her. Just a practice toss, but the sound sliced straight through her. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to imagine the world outside, the cold moon over the creek, a horse pawing the dirt, the warmth of a fire someone might have built for reasons kinder than this. Lightning flickered somewhere far off, just enough to make the saloon windows tremble. The men barely noticed, though one cursed at the approaching storm. Mara used that heartbeat to steady herself, even if steadiness was only a memory now. "Look at me," the tall one demanded. She opened her eyes. "Good girl," he said, tapping the dice against her cheek. "Let's make this interesting." Her pulse hammered. Nothing in the room existed but the hollow thud of her own heart. The rope chafed deeper as she fought it, fear sharp, metallic, on her tongue. Wind rattled the shutters again, and then bootsteps approached the saloon door. Slow, heavy, certain. The men paused. Mara held still, breath caught halfway to a gasp. The tall one narrowed his eyes at the entrance as the lantern flame bent toward the sound, like it recognized it. The door began to creak open. Someone was coming in. The saloon door groaned open, letting in a thin slice of cold night air. The men turned, some annoyed, some uneasy. Mara kept her head lowered, but her good eye lifted just enough to see the figure in the doorway. A broad-shouldered stranger, hat brim low, coat dusted with the long miles of the Wyoming road. He didn't rush, didn't speak, just stepped inside, like the storm behind him belonged to him alone. His boots hit the floor with a slow rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. The lantern above them flickered, unsure whose side it ought to light. Mara tried to breathe, but her lungs refused. The ropes had been cruel, but the fear in the room now was different, sharper, quieter. The tall man with the dice smirked. "Evenin', stranger," he drawled. "You're late. We already started." No answer. The stranger's gaze drifted over them all. Calm, but cold. It landed on Mara for only a breath, yet something inside her shifted. Small, fragile, but real. Not hope. Not yet. But the memory of it. He walked to the bar and set his gloves down. His movements were slow, deliberate. He didn't look at the dice, not at first. Instead, he studied the men, counting exits, distances, decisions. Saloon fights had their own rules. He seemed to know every one of them. "You lost?" the tall one asked, stepping forward. "Or you looking to join?" The stranger finally spoke, voice low, edged with dust and restraint. "I heard dice." "That you did," another man laughed. "We're rolling for her." Mara's breath caught, shame and dread tightening around her chest. She expected the stranger to look away, like every man who'd seen her bound, bruised, barely holding on. But he didn't. He held her gaze, steady as iron. Her pulse stuttered. The tall man swung the dice lazily in his hand. "Wanna play?" The stranger didn't blink. "Maybe." The men chuckled, amused by his calm. One spat on the floorboards. Another nudged Mara's chair sideways, tilting it sharply before dropping it back onto all four legs. Pain ripped down her spine, but she made no sound. She would not give them that satisfaction. "You got a name, cowboy?" one asked. The stranger considered that a moment, then answered, "Elias Mercer." A beat of silence followed. Short, but sharp enough that the room felt it. Mara had heard that name before. A rancher out past Black Butte. A man people didn't bother unless they wanted trouble they couldn't bury. She didn't know if the stories were true. Right now, she prayed they were. Elias stepped closer to the table. The tall man grinned, tossing the dice into Elias's waiting palm. "Let's see how your luck runs tonight." Mara's heart slammed against her ribs, not from hope, but from terror that luck had anything to do with her fate. Elias weighed the dice in his hand, rolling them between his fingers like he was testing the grain of them, the weight. the truth of the night itself. The room thinned into stillness. You could almost hear the storm gathering outside. He turned the dice over once, then lifted his eyes to the tall man. "What's the stake?" "The girl," someone said behind Mara, voice thick with cruelty. "Winner gets her first." Her stomach dropped. Her nails dug into the ropes. She wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in her throat. She didn't trust any man in that room. Not with her life. Not with her body. Not with anything she had left. But the way Elias looked at her, quiet, solid, unflinching, stirred something she couldn't name, something that felt like a breath after drowning too long. He lowered his gaze to the dice. "Then I'll roll." The tall man laughed, delighted. The others leaned in, eager as wolves. Mara shook her head, whispering, "Please, don't." Elias didn't look back. Not yet. He tightened his grip around the dice and stepped toward the table, the lantern flame trembling above him. The storm outside cracked. He raised his hand and let the dice fall. They tumbled across the scarred wood. The room leaned forward. Mara's hope fractured. The dice spun, slowed, and just before they stopped, Elias's hand moved, a motion too fast for thought. Night settled deep over the Wyoming plains, turning the Boone Ranch into a silhouette of fences, weathered boards, and a single yellow window burning against the cold. Malachi Boone stood inside that light, staring down at the letter he should have opened the day it arrived. The envelope had softened at the edges, worn from sitting on his table too long. Micah had found it tucked under the gate latch that morning, handing it over with dust still clinging to the corner. Malachi read it once, then again, each line carved through him like the edge of an old, forgotten blade. "Mr. Boone, I wouldn't ask if I had anywhere left to turn. Please, I need help before it's too late." She had signed it Eliza Hart, a name he only half remembered. He'd sewn buttons on her father's coat once, years ago, before the debts started swallowing the town whole. She'd always been polite, soft-spoken, working harder than anyone to patch what little life she still owned. The last sentence shook in his hands. "I fear what he will do to me next." He didn't need to know who he was. Dustwell only had a handful of men who traded in fear. Micah stepped into the doorway, hat in hand. The boy looked too young for the shadows under his eyes. "You okay, Mr. Boone?" Malachi set the letter down. "Should have read it sooner." Micah shifted uneasily. "If it's trouble, it sounds like she's in the kind you can't wait on." Malachi nodded, but didn't speak. Words had never come easy to him, not since the night the saloon swallowed his sister whole. Clara's smile under the lamplight, her laughter cut short by a chair scraping, a hand grabbing her wrist, a bet placed without her say. Clara had needed him too, and he hadn't come in time. He opened the small wooden box on the table. Inside, wrapped in faded blue cloth, lay a pair of ivory dice, smooth, heavy, stained in places time couldn't scrub clean. He hadn't touched them in years, couldn't. But tonight, his fingers brushed the ivory with something like reverence, or maybe dread. Memories stirred, unwelcome and sharp. The dice had been Clara's last gift, bought with tips she saved from the saloon where she worked. She'd meant them as a joke, a charm, a promise of luck. Luck never came. He closed the box gently, as if afraid it might burn him. "Micah," he said quietly, "saddle the bay." The boy blinked. "You're headin' into town at this hour?" She asked for help. He picked up the letter again, folding it carefully into his coat. "I won't be late this time." Outside, the wind had turned colder, brushing the grass flat in long waves. Malachi stepped onto the porch, feeling the weight of the night press against him. The ranch behind him was silent, a lonely place built from years of regret and work he could never finish. Yet something stirred inside him, a pull toward Dustwell he hadn't felt since Clara died. Micah brought the horse around, reins trembling in his hands. "It's dangerous down there at night," the boy warned. "I know." "You going alone?" Malachi met the boy's eyes. "Some things you walk into alone, but you stay here. Keep the lamps lit." Micah swallowed, then nodded. Malachi mounted the bay and turned her toward the long, empty stretch of land leading into town. The moon was thin, a sliver of bone hanging above the prairie. The horses' hooves thudded softly, steady and sure, like they understood more than he spoke aloud. As he rode, Malachi felt the past closing in. The laughter from a saloon, the crack of a fist hitting wood, his sister's voice fading into the crowd. He had buried all of it under work and dust, but the wind brought it back tonight. Cold and familiar. Halfway down the trail, he slowed the horse and looked toward the distant lights of Dustwell. They flickered like dying embers. A chill ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the memory of another night when someone he loved needed him. He had failed once. He would not fail again. He nudged the horse forward, faster now, the prairie wind whipping at his coat. Every stomp of the hooves pushed him closer to the place he'd sworn he'd never return to. Dustwell's silhouette sharpened against the horizon, and above the roofs, the red cactus saloon glowed with a sickly orange light, alive, noisy, and waiting. Malachi tightened his grip on the reins as laughter broke through the night air, drifting toward him like a warning. He didn't slow down. He rode straight for it. The wind slipped through the cracked door behind Elias, colder now, sharper, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. The men didn't notice. They were too busy reveling in their victory, too drunk on the sound of their own laughter. Mara kept her gaze on Elias, the only still point in a room spinning out of control. The tall man stepped closer, rolling his shoulders as if warming up for what came next. His shadow fell over her legs, long, jagged, swallowing what little light she clung to. His fingers curled, slow and deliberate, like hooks reaching for her skin. Mara flinched before he touched her. Instinct, not hope. Instinct never saved her, but it was all she had left. Easy now, he mocked. Night ain't over. She looked toward the door, the one Elias had walked through minutes ago, wishing it would open again, wishing something would change. The storm outside rumbled low, echoing like a warning across the mountains. "What you looking at?" the tall man barked. "Door ain't gonna help you." Elias shifted his weight. Barely. Mara saw it. So did the tall man. "What?" he snapped. "Got something to say, rancher?" Elias didn't move his hands, didn't lift his chin. The lamplight caught the edge of his jaw, the dark stubble, the quiet breath he took before answering. No. The room chuckled. The tall man grinned, sure of his victory. He tossed the dice into the air once, caught them, then turned back to Mara. "Let's get this over with." Mara felt the world closing around her. The heat of the lamps, the stink of whiskey, the rough wood biting into her wrists. Fear pressed behind her eyes, blurring the edges of everything. Her lips parted. Not for a scream, but for air she couldn't find. "Don't," she whispered. The tall man leaned close, breath hot on her cheek. "Didn't hear you." Her voice cracked. "Time 5 hums. Don't touch me." He laughed, a sound with no mercy in it. Then he reached for her, and the saloon door slammed open so hard the lantern swung wildly. A burst of cold air tore inside, rattling glasses, scattering loose cards across the floor. Every head snapped toward the sound. Elias didn't move. Mara's breath froze. The door swung on its hinges, groaning, revealing the empty street. The pale outline of the storm rolling in, the wind whipping dust like a warning. No one stood there. Nothing moved. But the moment broke the tall man's rhythm. He turned back, irritated. "Storm spooked the damn—" He didn't finish. Elias stepped between them. One clean step. No flourish. No bravado. Just a man placing himself where danger pointed. The tall man blinked. "You got a death wish, Mercer?" Elias's eyes didn't waver. His voice was low, steady, like he was speaking from the bottom of a long, unforgiving road. "Back away." A murmur rolled through the room, something uneasy, something the men couldn't name. Mara felt her breath return, shaky and thin, like stepping out of a river she'd been drowning in. The tall man squared his shoulders. "Don't make this harder. Move." Elias didn't move. The room tightened, stretched thin over the next heartbeat. "You really want to die for her?" Elias's jaw flexed. His hand brushed his holster. Barely a whisper of movement. But the temperature in the room changed. Mara felt it in her bones. Cold. Certain. "Move," the tall man repeated. Elias shook his head once. No. The lantern flickered. Someone cursed. The tall man reached for his gun, and Mara's heart stopped. The tall man's hand hovered over the grip of his revolver, fingers twitching, from impatience or arrogance. Mara couldn't tell. Her pulse thudded in her ears, drowning the quiet murmurs rippling through the saloon. Elias didn't flinch. He stood between her and the danger like the world behind him didn't exist. The lamplight drew a faint halo along the edge of his coat, glinting off the dust he carried from whatever long road had brought him here. "Don't," Elias said quietly. The tall man barked a laugh. "You think you can stop me? You're one man. One." Elias's gaze didn't leave him. "That's enough." Something in his voice made a few of the others shift uneasily. Mara felt it too, a steady, unyielding weight, like a man who had already measured the cost and accepted it. The tall man spat on the floor. "You must be crazier than you look." He stepped closer. Elias didn't move. Mara caught the faint rise of his shoulders as he inhaled. Slow, even. She watched Elias's hand. How relaxed it seemed. How patient. How he waited like the moment itself belonged to him. The tall man's lip curled. "Last chance, rancher." Elias didn't give him the courtesy of a response. Thunder rumbled outside, soft, but timed like some distant answer. A few men glanced toward the storm, uneasy. The tall man ignored them. His fingers brushed the grip of his gun. Mara's breath trembled. "Please," she whispered, too small for most to hear. But Elias heard. His head tilted the slightest bit. Enough to say her voice hadn't been lost. He didn't look back at her. He didn't need to. His stance shifted, barely a hair, bringing his weight to the balls of his feet. The tall man yanked his revolver free. Gasps erupted. Chairs scraped. Someone stumbled backward. Mara's heart lurched, hollowing her from the inside. But Elias didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. He stepped forward instead. One step. Bold. Quiet. It threw the tall man off balance, just long enough for Elias to close the distance. His hand shot out, clamping around the man's wrist before the gun could rise. The tall man swore, trying to wrench free. Elias held him like iron. The room stilled. The lantern swayed. Mara's breath froze. "You pull that trigger," Elias said, voice low. "You'll never get the chance to regret it." "Let go," the tall man spat, teeth clenched. Elias didn't. The men around them shifted, unsure if they should help or stay out of it. No one wanted to be the first to test a man who stood like he'd fought through storms worse than this one. "She ain't worth dying for," the tall man hissed. Elias's jaw flexed. A long moment passed. Heavy. Dangerous. Then he leaned in, voice barely above a breath. "She's worth more than any of you." The tall man lunged, desperate to break free. Elias twisted his wrist, a sharp, practiced movement, forcing the gun downward. The revolver clattered to the floor. Gasps burst across the room. Someone cursed. Someone backed toward the door. Mara's breath came quick, shallow, but for the first time, it carried warmth. Elias shoved the tall man back. The saloon trembled on the edge of something inevitable. The tall man scrambled for the fallen gun. Elias's hand slid toward his holster, slow as a promise. Mara's pulse roared like thunder. They moved at the same time. The tall man dove for the fallen revolver, fingers scraping the wood as he lunged. Chairs toppled. Someone yelled. The lantern swung wildly overhead, throwing the room into a mess of clawing shadows. Mara couldn't breathe. Her heart crashed hard enough to shake her ribs. Elias moved faster. He dropped low, a single smooth motion, boots sliding across the floorboards as he closed the distance. His hand swept toward his own holster, thumb brushing the strap loose. The room shrank into one narrow tunnel, all noise fading except the scrape of metal against leather. The tall man grabbed the gun first. Mara's breath snapped in half. His fingers curled around the grip, triumph burning hot across his face. He swung the barrel toward Elias. Elias didn't stop. He pressed forward, coat flaring behind him, closing the last sliver of space. The muzzle lifted, rising to meet his chest. The tall man's grin cut through the chaos. "Got you!" The gun misfired. A dry click. Then another. The tall man's grin shattered. Elias's hand clamped onto his wrist again, wrenching the weapon away with a force that made bone grind against bone. The tall man screamed, a sharp, ugly sound, rattling the glass on the shelves. The revolver skidded across the floor for the second time, spinning into a shadowed corner. "Damn it!" He threw a wild punch. Elias stepped aside, letting it cut through empty air. The tall man stumbled forward. Elias's elbow crashed down across the back of his neck. The impact drove him to his knees. The room erupted. Half the men backed away, unsure. Others reached for bottles or knives, none eager to move fast with Elias standing there like a storm held upright on two legs. Mara fought the ropes again, wrists burning, shoulders trembling. She wanted to scream for him, warn him, anything. But the sound wouldn't leave her throat. Time cores. Fear and hope tangled too tightly. The tall man tried to rise. Elias stepped into his path, planting his boot on the man's hand. A sharp cry tore out as bone threatened to crack beneath the weight. Elias didn't raise his voice. "Stay down!" Thunder rolled outside, shaking dust from the rafters. Someone muttered a prayer. Someone else cursed low. The fear in the room changed, sharpened, real now, heavy as a gallows rope. The tall man spat blood, defiant even as his body shook. "She ain't worth this." Elias leaned down, his face inches from the man's. "Worth more than you'll ever be." He straightened. The tall man crawled backward, cradling his crushed hand. No one helped him. They stared at Elias instead, weighing their odds. counting their breaths. For one heartbeat, the room exhaled. Then, the youngest man, jumpy and terrified, made a mistake. He grabbed a knife. Mara saw him first. Her breath caught, and her voice finally tore free, raw and broken. "Behind you!" Elias turned, but the knife was already rising. The young man lunged, and Mara felt the world tilt sideways. She pulled against the ropes so hard they burned open her skin, but she didn't feel it. Her eyes locked on the flash of steel, the rage twisting the boy's face, the way Elias braced a second too late. "No!" she cried, but the word drowned under boots and thunder. The blade came down. Elias caught his wrist mid-swing, but the momentum drove them both backward. They slammed into a table, wood splintering, glass exploding, whiskey flooding the floor. The boy clawed for another strike. Elias forced his arm down, muscles corded tight, breath harsh through his teeth. The knife scraped across the wood, missing flesh by inches. The saloon held its breath. Mara shook, ropes cutting deeper, blood warming her palms. Another grunt. Another crash. Elias pinned the boy to the floor, wrestling the blade from his hand. The steel clattered away. But the boy wasn't done. He reached for a broken bottleneck, rage twisting what was left of his face. And Elias's hand faltered for the first time. Mara gasped. He was outnumbered. He wasn't invincible. And the next blow was coming fast. The broken bottle glittered in the young man's grip, its jagged edge catching the lantern light like a shard of frozen lightning. He reared back, breath ragged, eyes wild with fear or pride. Mara couldn't tell. All she knew was that Elias was still on one knee, catching his breath, shoulders rising and falling under the weight of too many threats at once. "Get off me!" the boy snarled, twisting beneath Elias's hold. Elias tightened his grip on the boy's wrist, forcing the arm away from his chest. His jaw clenched hard, carved out of fatigue and unbroken determination. Mara saw it. The moment his strength faltered, just a flicker, just a breath, before he locked himself steady again. But the boy saw it too. He lunged. The shard slashed forward. Mara's scream tore free before she even knew it. "Elias!" The blow didn't land. Elias jerked sideways, pulling the boy off balance. The shard scraped across the floorboards, leaving a deep scar in the wood. The boy cursed, frantic now, like he'd rather die than lose face. Elias caught the second swing, pinning the boy's arm to the ground. His breath came harsh, warm fog spilling between clenched teeth. The muscles in his forearm trembled with the effort. "Stop," Elias growled. But the boy didn't stop. He spit upward, eyes burning with something ugly. Fear dressed as fury. "You think you're a hero?" he hissed. "Think she's worth any of this?" Mara felt something inside her crack. A memory. Her mother's gentle hands guiding a needle. The smell of warm bread, the quiet pride in her eyes. That world felt distant, but not gone. I said, "Stop," Elias repeated, and this time the words held a warning that made even the men at the edges stiffen. The boy struggled harder. Mara yanked at the ropes, ignoring how they tore deeper into her skin. Her voice broke open, raw and aching. "Please, don't let them touch me." The room stilled. The boy froze, a heartbeat's hesitation, startled by her trembling voice. But his anger snapped back, sharp as the glass in his hand. He raised his knee to strike Elias. Before it landed, Elias slammed his forearm across the boy's chest, pinning him with a strength dragged from somewhere older than pain. "Enough," Elias said, this time like he meant to end more than a fight. The boy's breath hitched. For the first time, fear washed over his face. Elias twisted sharply. The shard fell from his hand. It clattered across the floor, skidding to a stop near Mara's feet. Thunder cracked outside, rattling the windows. The lantern swayed again, scattering restless shadows. Some men stepped back, unsure if they were witnessing an ending or the start of something worse. Elias pushed off the boy and rose slowly. His breath came deep, controlled. But Mara saw the strain in his shoulders. The boy crawled backward, clutching his wrist, small now, furious and small. Elias didn't go after him. He turned to Mara. His eyes found hers, dark, steady, burning with something unspoken. "You all right?" he asked softly. Her voice shook. I don't know." He stepped closer. Not too close, just enough for his presence to warm the cold in her bones. "You will be," he said. Her throat tightened. Those words. No one had ever said them like they meant them. Behind Elias, the tall man snarled, pushing himself upright with his uninjured hand. "We're not done," he spat. Elias's shoulders tightened. Mara's breath caught. The room wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The tall man pushed himself upright with a groan, cradling his shattered hand against his chest. Blood dripped between his fingers. Dark, sticky, mean as the night outside. His good hand gripped the edge of a table, steadying himself as the lantern swung overhead, its glow catching the fury tightening every line of his face. Elias turned slowly, breath still settling from the last fight. Mara watched the shift in his stance, the subtle brace of his boots, the square of his shoulders, the calm in his eyes even with danger rising behind him. Something in him stayed unbroken, untouched by the chaos tearing the room apart. "Thought you'd had enough," Elias said, voice low, even. The tall man spat blood on the floorboards. "You think this ends 'cause you say so?" His voice cracked with pain and rage. He looked around the saloon, wild-eyed, desperate for backup. But the others stayed still. Some stared at their boots. Others stared at Elias, weighing whether their loyalty was worth dying for. "Cowards," the tall man hissed. His good hand slid toward the knife on his belt, fingers brushing the hilt as he pulled it free. The metal shone under the lantern, thin, hungry, cold. Mara gasped softly. Elias didn't move. Not yet. The storm outside deepened, rumbling across the plains like a warning dragging its claws through the dark. "You picked the wrong night to play hero, Mercer," the tall man growled. "And you picked the wrong girl to hurt," Elias answered. Mara's breath caught. Something warm flickered under the bruises blooming across her skin. She clung to his voice, even as fear pressed tight around her ribs. The tall man limped a step closer, broken hand trembling, knife aimed low toward Elias's ribs. "You step aside," he said, "and this ends. I walk out. You pretend none of this happened." Elias shook his head. "That's not how this works." The tall man's stare hardened. "You think you know what you're doing?" "I do," Elias replied. The tall man bared his teeth. "Then you die first." He lunged. The knife arced upward, glinting with the promise of violence. Elias sidestepped, faster than the bruises on his ribs should allow, grabbing the man's wrist mid-swing. The tall man grunted, driving his weight forward. Elias held his ground, boots digging into the floor, muscles tight beneath his coat. They struggled, breath against breath, knife trembling between them like it couldn't decide whose life it wanted. Mara twisted in her ropes, panic clawing under her skin. "Elias!" she cried. He didn't look back. Couldn't. The tall man's strength surged, pushing the blade closer. Elias grunted, trying to force it away. Their boots scraped. Sweat shone on the tall man's brow. Elias's arms trembled with the effort. "Give it up," the tall man snarled. "You're done." Elias's jaw clenched. "Not tonight." With a sudden surge, he twisted the man's wrist outward, forcing the knife away. The tall man cried out, stumbling. The blade wavered, aimless in the air. For a moment, a heartbeat stretched thin. Their eyes locked. The tall man knew he was losing. Elias knew it too. Then the tall man lunged again, clawing for Elias's throat. Elias shoved him back. The tall man slammed into a table, cards and whiskey exploding across the floor. The knife clattered across the boards, spinning beneath a chair. But he wasn't done. He rose again, chest heaving, eyes burning with the last of his rage. And this time, he reached for the pistol tucked at his boot. Mara's blood turned cold. Elias saw it. Too late. The moment Mara saw the pistol at the tall man's boot, the world narrowed into a single point of cold, breathless terror. The room didn't move. Even the storm outside paused, holding its breath with her. He yanked the weapon free, stumbling as he aimed. Pain twisted his face, but hatred steadied his hand. Elias was too far. Mara's heart stopped. "No!" she cried, the sound tearing from some place deeper than fear. Elias turned at the sound of her voice, and that small turn saved him. The first bullet hissed past his ribs, splintering the wooden post behind him. Men dove for cover. Someone screamed. The lantern swung violently as the air cracked open. Elias lunged sideways, boots sliding across the whiskey-slick floor. The tall man fired again. The shot went wild, thudding into a barrel behind the counter. Wood exploded. Liquid spilled. Mara jerked with every trigger pull, the rope tearing deeper into her skin. She couldn't look away. Not from Elias. Not from the gun. Not from the hatred aimed at her life. Elias found his balance and charged forward, cutting the distance before the tall man could steady the gun. But rage gave the tall man strength. Ugly, desperate strength. He fired again. The bullet grazed Elias's shoulder. He stumbled, catching himself on a chair. Blood darkened the edge of his coat. Mara's breath crumpled. Elias. But he didn't fall. Didn't break. He pushed off the chair, kept moving. The tall man's hand shook now, sweat dripping down his brow. His broken wrist couldn't hold the gun straight, but fear made him reckless. "You should have stayed out of it," he shouted, firing again. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. He closed the last step and knocked the gun hand upward. The shot punched into the ceiling. Dust, raining down like ash. The tall man swung wildly. Elias caught his arm, twisting it behind him. The gun fell, clattering across the floorboards. But hate doesn't die easy. The tall man rammed his elbow into Elias's ribs. Elias grunted, grip faltering for a fraction of a second. And that was all the tall man needed. He spun free, lunging straight for Mara. Her breath shattered. She pulled back so hard, the rope cut open her skin, blood running warm down her hands. "Don't!" she gasped. The tall man grabbed her chair, yanking it toward him. Pain shot up her spine. Her vision blurred. "You want her?" he spat, half laughing, half choking. "Then watch what happens next." Elias moved, and for the first time since he'd stepped through that door, there was no calm in him. Only fury, sharpened into something cold and merciless. His boots hammered the boards as he slammed into the tall man, knocking him away from Mara. They crashed into a table, cards erupting like startled birds. The tall man reached for the fallen pistol with his broken hand. He screamed when the bones shifted. Elias kicked the gun away, sending it skittering under a barrel. They grappled, grunting, breathless, the fight turning feral. The tall man clawed at Elias's coat, trying to choke him. Elias shoved him back, but exhaustion dragged at his movements. Mara watched, every heartbeat a blade carving deeper. The tall man grinned, bloody, hateful, triumphant in his own madness. "You're slowing down," he taunted. Elias didn't respond, but the tremor in his arms said enough. Pain was carving its way through what strength he had left. The tall man lunged again, and Mara found her voice, thin but fierce. "Elias, please." He looked at her, just for a breath. But that single breath held something raw, something human, something she hadn't felt since before this nightmare began. His jaw tightened, his decision settled. He turned back to the tall man, just as the barrel of another gun cocked in the corner of the room. A third man had stepped forward, and his aim was set on Elias's heart. The click of the hammer echoed louder than the storm outside. Elias froze mid-step, chest rising with a sharp breath he didn't have time to finish. Mara's pulse crashed so hard it rattled through her bones. She searched the dim corners of the saloon until her gaze locked onto the man emerging from behind a stack of barrels. A wiry figure, trembling hands, eyes too cold to be uncertain. He wasn't aiming out of loyalty. He was aiming out of fear. "Don't move," the man said, voice cracking like dead wood. The lantern swung, pushing shadows back and forth across the room. Elias turned slowly, hands low, open, showing no threat. But Mara saw the pain stiffening his shoulder, the exhaustion slipping into his stance, the toll every blow had carved into him tonight. "Put it down, Ben," Elias said softly. The man's jaw twitched. "Don't you tell me what to do." His eyes darted from Elias to the tall man gasping on the floor. "We didn't sign up for this," Ben stammered. "Didn't sign up to die for some girl who don't matter." Mara flinched, not at the words, but at the emptiness behind them. "Matter enough," Elias murmured. Ben's grip tightened. "Don't play saint. You walk in here, start a war. Now you want to act calm?" "Shoot him," the tall man gasped through blood. "End it." Ben swallowed hard. His finger trembled on the trigger. Mara couldn't breathe. Every moment stretched thin, like the air might tear open. "Ben," Elias said again, taking a single step forward. "You shoot me, and everything in you dies with it." Ben's face twisted. "Shut up." "Do it," the tall man rasped. "Now." Ben lifted the gun higher, and Mara's voice, cracked and small, slipped out before she could stop it. "Don't." Ben's eyes snapped to her. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. She saw something human flicker. The boy he was before nights like this twisted him into something else. But the moment passed. His jaw clenched. His aim returned to Elias. Elias drew a slow breath. "You don't want to do this." Ben's voice cracked. "You don't know a damn thing about me." "I know fear," Elias said quietly. "I know what it turns a man into." The words struck something raw in the room. Thunder rolled. A bottle clinked behind the bar. Even the lantern held still. Mara felt something inside her break open. "That man saved my life," she whispered. "He didn't know me, didn't owe me, but he stood between me and all of you because he believed I deserved to live." Tears shimmered at her lashes. "You shoot him, and you prove every cruelty in this room right." Ben's mouth parted, confusion flickering. Elias didn't turn, but his shoulders eased. Her voice had reached him. "Ignore her," the tall man snarled. "She ain't nothing." Mara's voice rose, not loud, but steady. "I am something, and you're terrified of that." Ben's aim faltered. The tall man hissed, "Ben, shoot!" Ben flinched, and that tiny break was all Elias needed. He moved, not fast like before, not clean. He moved through pain, through grit, through will. He lunged sideways. Ben fired. The gunshot cracked the world apart. Mara screamed. Elias hit the floor behind a toppled table. Breath punched from his chest. The board splintered inches from his ribs. Ben backed up, panicked, fumbling with the gun. Elias surged upward, slamming his shoulder into the table, sending it crashing toward Ben. The impact knocked Ben off balance, the revolver flying from his grip, skidding beneath the bar. "I'm done. I'm done, don't kill me," Ben cried, and folding in on himself as fear swallowed him whole. Elias didn't go after him. He turned, dragging breath, dragging pain, and crossed the room toward Mara. His knees hit the floor before her. Blood streaked his sleeve. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough, worn thin. Mara's breath trembled. "Elias, you're bleeding." "Been worse," he murmured, fingers working at the ropes. The storm cracked outside, rattling the windows. The lantern flickered wildly. Elias freed one wrist. Her hand fell into his palm. Warm, trembling, alive. He looked up at her. In that stolen moment, they were the only two souls left in the world. "Almost got you loose," Elias whispered. "Just hold on." But behind him, the tall man reached for the fallen knife, and his eyes locked on Mara. The tall man's fingers closed around the knife with a hiss of breath, his broken hand trembling violently, but his rage kept him upright. He rose from the floor, swaying like a drunk, driven by something sharper than pain. The lantern cast a crawling shadow behind him, long, crooked, hungry. Mara saw him first. "Elias," she tried to say, but her voice faltered, barely more than air. Fear tightened around her ribs, dragging her breath into thin, useless strands. The tall man staggered forward, the blade glinting in his blood-slick grip. Elias didn't notice. He was bent over her wrist, sawing through the rope with shaking fingers, breath hitching with every tug. Blood dripped down his arm, warm where their skin brushed. "Almost," he murmured, voice thick with exhaustion. Mara's eyes widened. "Elias, behind you." He turned. Too late. The tall man lunged. Elias shoved himself between Mara and the blow, taking the full weight of the knife across his shoulder. The blade bit through coat and skin, sinking deep. Mara screamed, reaching for him with her one free hand. The tall man grinned, blood streaking his teeth. "Should have stayed out of this, rancher." Elias clenched his jaw, forcing himself upright, fighting the pain inch by inch. His breath came sharp, ragged, torn. But he didn't fall. Not yet. With a raw growl, he twisted his body, dragging the blade out of himself, ripping it free from the tall man's grip. Blood spilled across the floor. Dark, heavy. The tall man stumbled back. Elias lunged forward, slamming into him with something primal, something deeper than survival. They hit the floor hard, skidding across broken glass and spilled whiskey. The knife skittered into the shadows. The tall man clawed at Elias's wound, trying to force his fingers inside it. "Time 1.7s. Elias roared in pain, punching him across the jaw, the crack echoing through the saloon. But the tall man rolled, pinning Elias for a heartbeat. "You're dead, Mercer. She's dead." Elias's hand found the man's throat. He squeezed. The tall man thrashed, kicking, clawing, boots scraping the floorboards. Elias's vision blurred. Blood loss turned the room into a spinning haze. But his grip stayed iron. "Not her," Elias rasped. The tall man swung blindly, striking Elias's cheek, but Elias didn't let go. Tendons stood out along his arm. The tall man's struggles weakened. His hands loosened. His eyes bulged. Then his body sagged. Elias released him. Moments before his own strength gave out. He slumped beside the man, pressing his hand to his open wound. Blood seeped through his fingers. "Elias," Mara cried, voice breaking. He tried to rise, lifted a few inches, then collapsed again. His eyes fluttered, then found her face, softening. "I'm fine," he whispered. He wasn't. Not even close. Mara reached for him, dragging her free hand toward his sleeve, pulling him closer with everything fear had left her. "You're bleeding too much," she breathed. "Been worse," he murmured, trying to smile, pain cutting it short. "I told you, I wasn't going to let them touch you." You didn't have to, she whispered. Yes, he breathed. I did. Around them, men backed toward the door, unwilling to stay a moment longer. Only Ben stayed, crouched behind a barrel, pale, shaking. Mara tugged at the last knot, reopening cuts, breath hissing through teeth. Hold on, Elias groaned, rising to one knee. No, don't move. He ignored her, reaching for the rope, fingers brushing hers, warm, shaking, human. You're walking out of here, he whispered. You hear me? Her throat tightened. She nodded through tears. He reached for the final knot, when a low groan rose from the floor. The tall man, somehow, impossibly, still alive. He pulled himself onto his elbow, reaching for something glinting in the shadows. A shattered whiskey bottle. His fingers wrapped around the jagged neck, lifting it toward Elias's back. And Mara's scream split the night. Mara screamed before she even understood the sound. It ripped from somewhere deeper than fear, a place inside her that had been bruised and beaten too many times to remember. The tall man rose behind Elias like the last shadow of a long nightmare, clutching the broken whiskey bottle in his good hand. Blood trickled down his jaw. His breath came in jagged bursts. He stumbled once, twice, but hatred rooted his feet to the floor. Mara, don't! Elias started to turn, but she saw how slow he'd grown, how heavy his own blood had made him. The tall man swung. The sharp glass caught the lamplight for a single heartbeat. Bright, cruel, final. Elias lifted his arm, but the blow still found him. The shard tore across his forearm, opening him deeper. Blood sprayed across the table leg beside him, warm and bright against the cold wood. The tall man's strength gave out the same moment the glass struck. His knees hit the floor. The shard slipped from his fingers, rolling under a chair as his head slumped forward. This time, he didn't get up. Silence crashed over the saloon like a heavy blanket. Mara's breath trembled. She couldn't move, couldn't blink. The world shrank to the sound of Elias's ragged breathing and the soft patter of blood dripping from his arm. Elias, she whispered, barely a breath. He turned to her. His face was pale beneath the dirt and bruises, his expression pinned between exhaustion and quiet stubbornness. He looked like a man still willing to stand between her and 100 more fists, even if he couldn't stand at all. You're all right? He murmured. She shook her head. You're the one bleeding. Elias tried to smile. It hurt too much. I've bled before. He stepped toward her, legs wobbling. Mara's chest tightened as he gripped the back of her chair for balance. His hand slipped once, smearing blood along the wood. Still, he reached for the rope around her final wrist. Time, Kates. Elias, stop. Sit down. Please. Her voice broke as tears welled hot in her eyes. Not until you're free. The rope was thicker than the rest. Tied last. Tied cruel. But Elias worked through it anyway. Teeth gritted. Breath hissing. Blood from his arm dripped onto her sleeve, warm even through the torn fabric. The knot loosened, fell, and her hand slipped into his. Her fingers trembled as she touched his palm, calloused and warm. Her breath caught when he closed his hand around hers. No one had ever held her hand with gentleness and strength in the same touch. It's done, he whispered. You're out of their hands. Mara collapsed against him, her forehead pressing into his chest. Sob after sob spilled out, shaking her whole body. She clutched the back of his coat, stained and torn, holding on like he was the only anchor left. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, not tight, not claiming, not demanding. Just there, solid, present, human. His breath brushed the top of her head. You're safe now, he murmured, though his own knees trembled so badly she feared he'd fall on both of them. Behind them, the few men who hadn't fled stood frozen. Some avoided looking at Elias altogether. Others watched him with fear sharpened into something like respect. They didn't move to help the tall man. They didn't move at all. Elias straightened slowly. Mara, he whispered, we need to go. She nodded, wiping her face on the back of her sleeve. Her legs shook when she tried to stand, nearly giving out. But Elias caught her at the waist with his good arm. Together, leaning on each other, they stepped over broken glass and splintered wood. Ben, the wiry man who had aimed at Elias, cowered in the corner. Mara flinched when she saw him, but he didn't reach for any weapon. He didn't even meet her gaze. Elias didn't spare him a glance. Mara's hand tightened on Elias's coat. Let's get out, she whispered. Yeah, he breathed. Come on. When they reached the swinging doors, Elias paused. The effort it took him to stay upright was etched across his face. Mara brushed her fingers gently against his jaw. You don't have to stand tall right now, she whispered. No one's watching. He nodded, breath trembling. Just one more step. She pressed her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. Lean on me. He did. Together, they pushed through the doors. The morning air hit them like a baptism, cold enough to sting, pure enough to start washing the night away. The sky was turning pale, streaked with silver and rose. Snow drifted in soft flakes, melting on Elias's brow, clinging to Mara's tangled hair. Elias exhaled, a long, broken breath of relief. His knees buckled. Mara held him up. "Easy," she whispered. "Sit down before you fall." He sank onto the porch rail, back resting against the post. His shoulders slumped. Blood spread slowly across the boards beneath him. Mara knelt in front of him, cupping his cheek with trembling hands. "You can't stay like this," she said. "We need to wrap that wound." He blinked heavy. "Later." "No," she said more firmly. "Now." She tore a strip from her dress, hands shaking as she wrapped it around his arm. Elias winced, but didn't pull away. His eyes softened as he watched her work. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered. "I'm only standing because you did," she answered. His lips twitched at the corners. "Fair enough." She tightened the cloth. Blood still seeped through, but slower now. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "Stop thanking me," he murmured. "You kept me fighting." "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "You did more than you know." For a moment, they simply breathed together, her hands on him, his presence wrapped around her like a shield she never thought she'd have. Elias looked toward the horizon. A long, dusty road stretched west, empty, harsh, quiet. "Where will you go?" Mara asked. "Back to the ranch," he said. "It's not much, but it's safe." She hesitated, then softly, "Take me with you." Elias blinked, stunned, not in confusion, but in something warmer. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "You're all I have left, and I don't want to lose you." His gaze dropped. His voice cracked, more from emotion than pain. "You won't." He tried to stand again. Mara rose with him, bracing herself under his arm. Step by step, they moved down the porch and onto the dirt road. Snow crunched beneath their feet. A new day stretched wide before them. "Mara?" Elias murmured. "You walk first. I'll be right behind." She looked at him, at the bruises, the cuts, the stubborn fire still alive behind tired eyes. She brushed her thumb across the back of his hand. "I won't walk ahead unless you stay close," she whispered. "I will." And he meant it. Together, they stepped into the street, two silhouettes cut against the rising sun. Mara smelled fresh snow. heard the soft whicker of a horse somewhere down the road, felt Elias lean heavily on her, and the stubborn warmth of a man who refused to fall. "Heavy?" she asked softly. "Maybe," he said. "Then lean," she whispered. "I'll carry what I can." He let out a low laugh, gentle, tired. "Guess we make a good pair, then." They walked until the shadows of the saloon stretched long behind them, until the wind carried away the last scent of blood and whiskey, until the world grew quiet enough that the only sound was the soft crunch of their steps on the cold earth. At the outskirts of town, Mara paused. Elias looked at her, breathing slow. "You okay?" She nodded, tears blurring her vision, warm against the cold air. I didn't think I'd ever see a sunrise again." Elias squeezed her hand. "Then let's make this one count." They kept walking, one slow, honest step at a time, toward a horizon that, for the first time in both their lives, didn't look like danger. It looked like a beginning. There's a quiet kind of peace that settles over the Wyoming plains after a night like the one Mara and Elias survived. As the dust lifts and the snow begins to melt under the newborn sun, their story leaves us with a gentle reminder. Sometimes life gives us a second chance when we least expect it. Sometimes the road we think we've reached the end of suddenly opens again, leading us somewhere kinder, somewhere warmer, somewhere we didn't dare hope for. Mara spent so long believing life had no mercy left for her. Elias, too, carried wounds that went deeper than the bullets and bruises on his skin. And yet, in the midst of that darkness, these two souls, each battered, each lonely, found a moment of grace. A moment where someone reached out instead of turning away. A moment where survival became something more. The beginning of healing. If you've lived a long life, you know something about nights that feel endless. You know about loss, heartbreak, courage, and the quiet ways people save one another. Sometimes with words, sometimes with simple presence, sometimes with nothing more than the willingness to stand up when everyone else steps back. You might have known your own Elias once, or perhaps you were someone's Elias in your younger days. And maybe that's why this story speaks a little differently to those of you who've walked many miles already. Because love, dignity, and redemption aren't treasures of the young. They're treasures for anyone who's lived long enough to understand their real weight. As Mara and Elias step out into the morning light, leaning on each other, they remind us of something gentle and enduring. that even after the hardest seasons, after the harshest winters, after nights when we thought no one would come for us, there is still room for new beginnings. They aren't healed yet, and they won't pretend to be. Healing takes time, months, years, sometimes a lifetime. Those of you with silver in your hair and stories in your eyes already know this truth. But they've taken the first step together. And sometimes that's all a person needs. If this tale stirred something in your heart, if it brought back memories, or touched something tender, or simply reminded you of the strength it takes to keep going, then I'm grateful you shared these minutes with me. Stories like this are meant to be felt slowly, like warm coffee on a cold morning, or the way the wind carries the scent of home across the prairie. Before you go, I'd truly love to hear from you. Yes, you. Your thoughts, your reflections, your memories. Did a moment in the story remind you of someone you once knew? Did Mara's courage, or Elias's quiet strength, speak to you in some way? Did the ending bring you peace, hope, or simply a gentle ache in the heart? Your comments mean more than you know. They guide future stories, and they build a place where folks, especially those of you who've lived enough to appreciate the deeper things, can gather and share your wisdom. And trust me, younger viewers read your words too. They learn from you. They listen. So if you have the time, leave a thought below, even just a few words. You matter here. If you enjoyed the story, it would mean a great deal if you gave this video a like. It helps this little corner of the internet stay alive and reach others who love Western tales filled with heart, courage, and second chances. And if you'd like to join us for more stories like this, tales of the Old West woven with tenderness and grit, please consider subscribing. Many of you who watch regularly aren't subscribed yet, and hitting that button is one of the best ways to support this channel. It's simple, it's free, and it lets me know you want more stories that honor the spirit and nostalgia of the frontier. And if you'd like to be notified when a new story is posted, so you never miss a chapter of these journeys, go ahead and tap the little bell icon. That way, each time a new tale of courage, redemption, or unexpected love appears, you'll be right there at the start of it. To all of you, especially the ones with decades of life behind you, I want to say thank you. Your presence here, your time, your attention, it's an honor. You carry history within you, And sharing these moments with you means more than words can say. Until the next story, may your days be gentle. May your nights be peaceful. And may the road ahead bring you the kind of light Mara and Elias found in the dawn. Take care, my friends. And I hope to see you in the comments.